next item on our agenda is old library proposal discussion. Turn the time to City Manager Shane Scott.
Mayor and City Council, following up on our discussion a couple of months ago regarding the status of the old library, we've asked Scott with JRCA to come and talk to us about some of the proposals that we have discussed individually and collectively for that building. I think right now what staff's looking for is some direction on the future of the building, the size, what exactly happens to it. I think as Scott goes through his presentation, it'll jar some questions from you, and I think that discussion will be productive. As you probably know, we budgeted this year for the design of this building, whatever that is, and so we just kind of want to know what that design looks like as far as you're concerned. So maybe we could turn the time over to Scott and let him introduce himself and what he's going to do tonight.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate it. My name is Scott Holmes with JRCA Architects, and I'm happy to be back in front of this body this evening. It's been a few months since I last stood in front of you and presented the original draft master plan. Roughly, I think it was November of 2015, if I recall. So. And as I move through this presentation, again, please feel free to ask the questions that are on your mind or may need some further clarification. So back in late last year, Shane invited me to meet with him and start this process again about what to do with the library building. We understand over the last year or so, or maybe a little less than that, the community has been involved in providing their input as to what actions the council should pursue for this building, whether it be a reuse or maybe some other alternatives for the building. So what I want to do here briefly is just, again, reorient the City Council and the residents with the master plan draft. We're not going to go over that draft tonight. That's already been, we've still posted on the website, and I believe this body has run through it in detail over the last year. Again, the original draft we presented in the City Council meeting back in November of 2015. The tasks included evaluation of existing city facilities, development of space needs assessments, and planning recommendations to support both current and future needs, not only on a physical facility level, but also for staff level. Tonight we are reevaluating and further defining recommendations specific to the library building itself. We are not planning on discussing any other portions of the master plan draft that'll come in future sessions as they arrive. We're also here to incorporate, this update is to incorporate input from the committee for the old library, as previously stated.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. I guess that'll keep me from squinting as well.
So sorry.
It's hard to get that in.
There you go.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, so better.
Good job. Very
No, funny.
That's right.
Thought we all had to have our eyes checked for a sec.
so sorry.
It's not good when the presenter's squinting, is it? Also, what is the future of the Stewart Art Gallery? Again, the former library building houses the Stewart Art Gallery. Is this still an appropriate space to house that gallery? Is the size sufficient? Are there potential future plans or thinking to enlarge the facility, maybe potentially relocate it? Those are some questions that should be reflected in this discussion as well. Is the investment in repurposing the library building the best approach? Or again, as we will discuss, some other alternatives to reinvestment in the current facility. And also provide updated cost information to this body. I would assume that most of you know over the last year or so, our Wasatch Front, north to south, has experienced quite the building boom, and thus cost of projects and construction have seen an increase since we last met with you. So real quickly, just to organize or orient everybody with the facts of the building. Constructed in 1944, the building provides historical value to the community and is context sensitive. And of course, decisions regarding the use or replacement should warrant public input and support, which again is what you've, the task you've undergone in the last year with the community involvement. Again, as I mentioned, the facility houses a Stewart Art Gallery, which I understand is only accessible via tours or scheduled tours at this point, so nobody is there receiving people on a day-to-day basis as it was accustomed to more so when the library was actually a library. Again, the remainder of the building is vacant and not being utilized for municipal services, an unused city asset. For future long-term use, the building will require substantial improvements and replacement of building systems, which would also include a seismic upgrade. That goes, reflects back into our original master plan draft as recommendations. To reflect what the original master plan draft for this facility outlined was to create a new Kaysville community development and legal building. This would involve moving community development out of the city center here, both planning and zoning, engineering, as well as the building department, remodel the existing building, and then remodel the vacated spaces within the municipal center. When we did originally create our needs assessment, it came to light that a future legal department may be in place in the future of Kaysville City. Therefore, the consideration to potentially house those individuals that would create that body in the city to be located in the former building. So now we'll discuss the options. Again, these are a combination of our original master plan draft recommendations, as well as incorporating guidance from the library committee over the last year. So option A is a change in use with minimal construction. So what this would reflect is the Stewart Art Gallery and Museum would stay where it is with either minor improvements or again, some general cleaning, some upkeep, housekeeping activities. We would recommend patch and repair of the building and systems as needed. Go in and identify and remedy any current issues that can be completed, and also address any maintenance issues with mechanical systems, also including any carpeting or painting or things of that necessity that would be required. Create minimal construction to create usable space. Again, the building has not had any attention to it to create any type of office space or public interaction or defined spaces at this point. The financial investment in this option is considered low. Option B will be a change in use with complete remodel and upgrades. This is actually broken up into roughly 3 phases. The slide does represent 2, and I'll identify the third as I move through the slide. Phase 1 would be remove and temporarily store the Stewart Art Gallery and Museum. While Phase 2 commences, create either the Kaysville City Community Development and Legal Building as previously recommended in the draft, or create the Kaysville City Community Development and Stewart Art Gallery and Museum per the following space plan, which I will show to the group here momentarily. Phase 3 would be then remodel the existing Municipal Center building as determined. Previous draft indicated some work, not only in this portion of the building with the council, dais, audiovisual systems, lighting systems, but also included some other remodel functions within this building, mainly dealing with the restrooms and the public area. The financial investment in this option is considered high. Option C would be a complete building replacement, so demolish and replace with new construction to meet both current and future needs. Future needs meaning this building replacement will be considered a 50-year plus lifespan, and also intended to maximize and meet the overall future space needs of the city at the same time. Again, remodel existing municipal center, council, and community room. This room, again, as I previously mentioned, in option B. The financial investment we consider to be mid to high range. The proposed floor plan, this is, again, I'll show you two options here. This is option B1. Some of this may look, again, familiar for those who were in attendance. The colors here are a little diluted, so if you want to follow along here with the pointer, north for orientation purposes is the left in the plan view. The current access to the building here is at the south third. The north 2/3 of the building, we propose to create the community development department. So again, this would house the planning and zoning, building department, engineering. Those would include separated access points for public to interact with staff, sub-conference spaces, shared workspaces, shared break rooms, staff toilets, long-term storage, spaces that were identified in the original needs assessment. The south half would be constructed to create, again, the future legal department that would have a shared conference room that could be jointly used by either department or by other city bodies as necessary. Option B2, again, to create the community development departments and also maintain the Stewart Art Gallery as is, and also create a shelled space for a future museum, keeping those two functions separate. So let's discuss what these cost ranges include. So again, the recommended improvements for both design, option B1 and B2, we recommend obviously demolition of the entire interior of the building, perform seismic upgrades to the building structure. This would include creation and completion of the building diaphragm, upgrade to roof joists and deck, construction of new shear walls, and also extend slab and structure where the current boiler systems and electrical systems are located. These proposals do include removing those systems in their entirety and replacing them with current technologies that are highly efficient and obviously would serve the building appropriately. The estimated cost for both options B1 and B2 is approximately $1.675 million. That equates to about $268, just under $269 a square foot. Again, these costs include, they're built upon our original estimates from late 2015 and includes cost increases that we've experienced over the last year, and also estimates for a late 2017 construction start. Option C is the building replacement. Let me give a little, I know this slide's probably a little difficult to see. The upper portion there, we wanted to give some parameters and guidance onto what a replacement structure might entail. Right now, the existing size of the former library building is approximately 6,700 square feet. And as we worked through the original needs assessment and identified, again, where the future needs of city space and staffing might be required, we want to ensure that in presenting a replacement option, that obviously the city focus on ultimately constructing a facility that can house future staff needs and meet the needs of spaces as well, in conjunction with remodeling of this building at some point in the future. We've given some design values for above grade and below grade construction. Again, this is based upon an 8,000 square foot footprint. Again, a little more than 1,000 square feet above and beyond what the current library building currently occupies. We've given some multiple options here. The first option is a one level with an unfinished basement. An unfinished basement giving you the advantage of a blank slate, if you will. Also can be used as storage. You could also incorporate some maybe performing arts. Maybe you could also incorporate, relocate the gallery functions into those lower basement levels. But it gives you flexibility for to meet the future needs or undefined needs at this point. So again, we've given an idea of an estimate here, a total cost of just under $4 million, $3.9 million, again, with the assumption that construction would commence in late 2017, depending on, again, direction and guidance from the council. On the right side of this slide, we've given some alternate options, not to exclude any potential here, 2 levels with unfinished basement and also 2 levels with a finished basement. And you can see their cost here reflective at $5.9 million for a 2-level with an unfinished. 2-level with a finished basement is approximately $6.4 million. So just again, to provide some options and guidance, these numbers are not meant to be an end-all solution. It's just to provide the council with an understanding of what can be done and what potentially those cost impacts are to the city. Questions? Clarifications I can provide the council.
Just to be clear, on your first slide, you had a low option, and the low was still 1.6 million, right? And then your medium was 3.9, and then 6.4 on the 3 options that you're presenting?
No, I want to clarify on these, let's see here. Oriented back here on my list. The option A, which was the change in use with the minimal construction, we have not identified a cost associated with that. At this point, that is an undefined option. For options B, B1 and B2, with the floor plans I provided, that's where the cost information resides at the 1.6 million.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. Why is, or one question for me, I should say, why is the life of the library building, if it's retrofitted and redone, only be 10 to 15 years?
What we're indicating here is an estimated functional life. And oftentimes what we find in our public projects is in these remodel situations, an initial investment can be made with a vision of a certain departments or functions that want to be provided in that facility. Over time, some of those functions either may evolve or change, or you may find that a future need needs to be incorporated. or maybe again the gallery function may want to be enlarged. So we wanted to reflect something that represents at least a good decade's worth of use. It doesn't mean that this is again set in stone, that after that time frame it's expected that you won't use this building. It's just like anything, any tangible object. At some point it'll run its useful course and timeline, and should really strongly be considered for replacement.
So if I were to put it a little different way, maybe it's not that the building itself would be structurally unsound and you'd have to rip down the building, but maybe the needs of the city would have evolved because it's a smaller footprint, and you may need to either build space somewhere else, or and the reason why you have the new building with a 50-year life is because it has a larger footprint, more square foot, and would accommodate more needs further into the future?
Correct,
Okay.
correct. And just to give a little brief understanding of, again, back to the investment on a seismic upgrade, the recommendations and the costs that are reflected in the estimate give a level of improvement that will allow the building to maintain its function for a duration of time during a seismic event that will allow occupants to safely evacuate. With this level of structural and seismic upgrades, we do plan for a certain amount of damage to happen to the structure. However, the structure should remain standing to allow occupants to evacuate. Obviously, if we wanted to maintain the building in its entire form, that would be a substantially larger investment and time into upgrading the structure itself. And at that point, you come to a determination, well, is that investment really worth maintaining this existing facility, or is it time to replace it with a new structure that, again, will be up to current design standards and meet the future needs? So.
Scott, so if this council decides to do option B1 or B2, and the space needs don't change of the city, will that building last for 50 years?
I can't honestly say it would last for another 50 years. Again, building being built back in 44, it is, again, approaching its useful life. In today's standards, we at least design for a minimum of 50 years for lifespan of the building. Obviously, building into today's technology, we anticipate that to last beyond a 50-year lifespan. When we're coming and talking about vast improvements to an existing facility, again, just to improve it enough to keep it standing in its form, to address those life safety issues. Again, I can't say for certain that that building would last for another 50 years, given any time a seismic event could occur. Does that answer your question, Shane?
Yeah. And I guess I'm less worried about seismic events and more just regular wear and tear on a building. I think it'd be important for this council to understand if there's a difference there's probably an obvious difference in building new versus reconstructing what's
Correct.
there. But if it's virtually the same, I think that would be important for them to understand that.
Right. And to respond to the question again, then the amount of investment and improvement that we're recommending, I do feel that the longevity of the building could last, again, beyond these 10 or 15 years. I would agree that that's a safe assumption to make. Would it, again, be sufficient for another 50 years? Typically, our current technologies in both HVAC equipment and standards of that nature usually last anywhere from a 25 to a 30-year lifespan. Again, roof systems, we've recommended replacing the roof system as well. Generally, those at the 20-25 year, you start looking at replacement. So again, keep in mind that there's ongoing maintenance and upgrades that this building would still incur beyond that time frame of roughly 15 to 20 years, so.
So is the idea here, Mr. Scott, that getting some guidance from the council on a direction is going to help in the upcoming preparations for our budget? Is that really our timing, or is it?
No, not for budget, but we've already budgeted to design this building.
Right.
So right now, we don't have any idea what, if I were to tell Scott, go design this building, he'd say, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
You want to start over? You want to do retrofit? What do you want to do?
The only reason why I ask is prior to this meeting, we had a discussion, a 2-hour work session about roads, and received a report that if we were to, right now, we will receive about $1.2 million a year in gas tax money that we use to fix the roads. To try and get us on par, we need to increase that to $3 million a year every year for the next 4 years to get our roads back on track. And I mean, if you were to just equate it to how you would accomplish that, like in a tax increase, it's similar to the one, if not worse than was discussed before. It's pretty significant, and there may be other ways to do it, but the reason why I guess I asked that is the presentation is very helpful and very insightful, and I think helps give us some guidance. It's probably timed as such that as soon as he went past option A, I kind of lost interest, especially when you consider the police station was $5 million, and we're looking at 6.9 for this, and that, in my mind at least, was a hey, if we have a big earthquake, this building cannot fail. If we have a big earthquake, and lawyers and well, never mind, I won't even go there. But in all seriousness, I mean, there's a certain level of public demand and need, and I don't want to jump way forward, but my gut would tell me, especially on the heels of the discussion we just had 2 hours ago, anything that maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that's what we can kind of get some guidance from the council. Anything above a minimal investment, a 50-year building, I think, would be excellent. And a 15-year building in 10 years, I think, could be equally as excellent. But a 50-year building today, my gut would tell me that, especially after our last conversation, this council is probably going to be like, no, we really need to look. We need space here. We really need space at City Hall. But can you accomplish that with a much more minimal investment to actually move those operations over, and then come up with a strategic plan that allows us to address expansion or replacement or whatever it is further down the road when, I mean, it seems like this isn't official, but it seems like every council can handle one really big effort. And I think from all of our meetings, and I don't mean capacity-wise, I heard Andy laugh, and that's not really how I meant. I just mean that our focus is on one really big, and it's been very clear that our focus right now is on roads. The idea of going from freeing up an extra $1.8 million a year for roads and then figuring out how to build a $6 million building, I just don't see that happening. I don't even see the 1.6 happening, to be honest with you, based on our previous discussion. But maybe the council could just chime in on if we all have that position that, yes, we have the need, minimal investment to get us by so we can start utilizing the building, what does that cost, and then pursue that direction, unless there's an appetite to look at something bigger. But I want to cut your presentation short, but that's all I could think of the whole time you were talking was, there's no way. There's no way. But
Well, I was hoping to not compete with roads tonight. Roads are always a sensitive and important aspect of any municipality, so.
Mayor, I'll chime in. You've encapsulated a lot of what I was thinking as well, going back and forth from B1 and B2 to C, and we don't have a cost estimate for option A, but you mentioned you described it as being low compared to these others. And obviously it would be. The art gallery would stay as it is. We would do patch and repair to the building.
Correct.
And the systems to the minimum extent possible. Minimum in construction that will create usable space within that building. And I'm always of the opinion, or always would prefer to try to play the long game over the short game. I think with regard to the needs that we have with roads and the discussion we had 2 hours ago, those are going to, I think, take priority over other larger projects that the city could undertake. I do think we clearly need space in that building. I think for purposes of this year, and potentially even this council, probably just trying to use the space as best as possible for as inexpensively as possible is probably the best bet for now. But I do want to, I guess I championed the long game, but I want to make a comment about that, because I think, as I've discussed, I really appreciated the library committee that got together and discussed what to do with that building, and their input on that was very important. They did acknowledge that the committee itself was not unanimous in terms of what their recommendations would be for the use of the building. Some were, most I think by far were interested in preserving the building, but some were indicating that they thought it would be best long-term to replace it. I think that maybe not this council, but a future council certainly probably needs to tackle that particular question. And I, just looking at it in my opinion, and I'll just throw this out to the council, having lived in Kaysville, virtually all of my life, I don't share the nostalgic attachment to the building itself. I went there as a kid and checked out books for years and did story time and all that kind of stuff in the building. But I think, as with Davis High School and a number of other buildings, it's probably outlived its usefulness in the long run and probably needs to be replaced. Now, we can build it to incorporate some of the architectural elements that are in it, the rock and whatnot. I think that would be a clear must, but I think long-term, it's my opinion anyway, that I think the building probably needs to be replaced with a more useful building long-term. So, but in the short game, I think we're stuck with option A, personally. Or maybe some hybrid of option A and option B with some more serious modifications to the building, but again, cost being the factor.
Right, I think it would be prudent if, again, based upon the guidance of the council and with staff, I think it would be prudent at this point to take a step back with the option A and try to further develop a plan that we can come back to and present to this body again with some alternatives, not only to layout, but also, again, further prioritize where the needs are in the building to, again, get by with the short-term aspect as opposed to a long-term investment.
Did option A, does it need seismic?
Not necessarily.
Okay. That's what I
Not
thought.
necessarily.
From the historical guy that was here on one of the committees I sat in on, he was actually impressed with the quality of the building. I don't know if he climbed in the attic or what, but he mentioned the trusses look good, the walls look good. Your assessment's awesome. Obviously, you have a lot more experience than I do in that arena. But I see the nostalgic of the building. My opinion is definitely staunchly to keep it, and we don't need to skimp on a remodel, but it definitely needs, there's 2 people in this office right now that share an office. Is that correct, staff? We've got 2 guys that share it. Yeah, 2 full-timers and then maybe a couple part-timers that share. So we definitely need office space. And, and if we do go with a legal staff, I don't know if we need a whole wing of a building. And this is my opinion. That's all.
Oh, of course, of
Grain of
course.
salt.
Of course.
But I'm more of a wants over needs type of individual and a practicality individual. And, the way I see the city functioning now, we've functioned so long, to where we're at. We went through probably one of the biggest construction booms the city will ever see. And I think we're kind of over that hump a little bit. I just don't know longevity if we need another big grand building. I think the square footage this would add to us in a way that was restored, I think we could get plenty of years out of it. I would hate to put 300,000 or 400,000 even in it right now. If as Chris is mentioning, well, maybe we just, when the tides shift and you get a council that will do it, so in 3 years, when there could be new council members up here or whatnot, I'd hate to dump 300 or 400K now on the premise that maybe they'll come in and tear it down in 4 or 5 years. And I honestly think we could get another 30 out of it, and that's just coming from what the other expert had said. And I agree with what you're saying. I think year 15 is you're saying, hey, strategically, you might want to tear some more walls out and redo that. And I think that's fine in 15 years, but I think the building, I think it'll stand the test of time.
Yes,
I don't
agreed.
know if there's a
agreed.
need for all this space, so.
And I think, again, to reiterate what I previously said on more of a scheduled priority, that would allow us, again, to identify those immediate needs to maintain the building as it is and become occupiable again, if you will, to meet current staff requirements and space needs. And what that allows us to do is to really nail down specific costs that are impacted. So in getting a total back in front of this body for input before we continue to proceed. That's something I can work with staff very easily in conducting a stronger plan with option A that again we can continue to evolve and work on until it's an acceptable plan for this body.
Well, forgive me for the awkwardness that we're all just aimed at you. It's not really meant to be addressed at you, right?
Oh, no.
But,
quite
last thought would be if option A, do you have a hip shot gut yes on option A? You'd probably hate to say it, but are we talking half of option B or?
I don't like to, let me say I don't like to. I try to refrain from
Sure.
just blindly throwing some numbers out there.
I have a hunch guess of being in the background too, but I get it.
Yeah,
I just.
In my investigations and the work we've done in the master plan and understanding where the current systems, the state that they're in, remediations that have been recommended by our engineers that have taken full evaluations of the building, it would be my recommendation that roughly about $500,000 would be an appropriate amount to budget for. Again, that's a starting point. That doesn't mean that the project ultimately has to cost that much, but at least a realistic number that would get off on the right foot, so to speak.
Just in conclusion, the conclusive thought that I have is I would rather let the building sit. This is once again just my personal opinion. I would rather see the building sit then for 3 years, and if a new council wants to spend, $5 or $6 million, than spending $500,000 now, or to spend a real, small $100,000, $200,000, get it to where it can be occupied. If that's really, kind of the underlying intention is get a council and spend $5 million again.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
I was just saying, I would echo that thought. I mean, we always hate the Band-Aid approach, but you talk about a boiler. It's got an old boiler in there, systems that, we talked about replacing the HVA system here, which I think is 30 years old.
Correct.
And we ended up not doing that at the time, but same kind of thing. If there's a smaller, to say, maybe give us the 10-year Band-Aid option, where maybe you don't redo the HVAC, because why put in a 40-year HVAC system if the future council may look at doing something. It has sat empty now for 18 months. I remember when we anticipated the library opening at the new site, we kind of thought, okay, this gives us some options and gives us some ability to expand. I think the northwest corner, there's that slopes a little bit to that, so maybe you don't want a chair with wheels in that office, but knowing what the Band-Aid, I don't want to call it that, but that feels more like what we can afford right now, and maybe a couple versions of Band-Aid might be nice to know, because I don't see spending $75,000 of the $500,000 on redoing all the HVAC systems. Andy's maybe looking at me saying, excuse me, what about it's 100 degrees? But if it's a 40-year system that's going to go in a building that we might last, it would be nice to know what the option A, and maybe give us some subsets of option A, an A, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I would tend to agree with what Councilmember Adams just said. If we go too high, then it's like, why do it on the flip side? We've got the space and we have the need, and we've had the space and the need for more than 18 months, but we've at least had the space for 18. It would be nice to get some kind of direction on what to do, even if it's temporary.
Correct.
But does anybody disagree? Do you want to give that guidance?
I hope my comments didn't disagree with that. I mean, it's
No, I
consistent
think that's what Chris is saying
That was largely
too.
what I was saying.
I personally think that right now, this is probably the approach, but there is so many, I think that the citizens and us alone, we need to understand that these aren't the only options we could do. I think that 10 years from now, say we limp along for 10 years, we might look at it completely different than what we're looking at it now. And, I kind of disagree with the boiler thing. I do know that on some of these furnace systems, when you put them in, these boilers are so inefficient that literally it's just 5 years and they're paid for, just in what you save in savings.
That was a totally unqualified comment,
Okay.
but
So
just
what I-
giving an
what I-
example.
I'm just, Andy knows that. So I would like to see that, but I agree with everything that's being said here. We don't have the money to be doing a $6-7 million deal right now. And I think we need to look at it down the road. There is so many options that you could do. Like, for example, Farmington built a great big one, but you know what? They rent more than half of it out, and they make half their payment by renting it. And now they got a future to be able to, to expand when they have a bigger city. There's a lot of things that we could do. You could put a basement in and turn around and rent that out until you need the space. But I think right now is probably not that decision. I think we take care of our current needs, and then this is something that for another council down the road to probably take a look at it, where we have better information and a better vision of what the city wants.
I won't add to anything that's already been said, because I largely agree that, there's so many other things. When in our work meeting, we were talking about maybe a fire substation and the need to go to a full-time fire, and, so maybe you can find it, but that's the problem. You find a little bit out of the general fund, now all of a sudden you're out of money, and then maybe there's a more pressing need. Having said that, it does, and again, I'm not an expert on HVAC systems either, or what really needs to, devil and the angel's always in the details. So if you could get to a place, and I guess my only questions would be, and apparently that's already been answered, that it would be, although it could take a seismic upgrade, it's probably safe for occupancy. I guess that would be my only concern. It's not going to crumble, when you get a 4.2 earthquake and people are going to be killed or anything like that. So I guess that would be my only question there, not knowing. The other thing would be, clearly define in option A exactly what we need right now, and then later down the road, I tend to agree with you, Councilmember Snell, that I don't know that a 1944 building is really necessarily a historic thing. So at the time when you do have to address more space 10 years from now, maybe you're looking at a new option and something that could still house the museum, who knows at that point.
Right.
But at this point, yeah, maybe just clearly define what space is needed, because I think like most of us have been through the offices and can see that there's a need for some additional office space.
I think in the year 2044, though, it will be a historic building. And if it was completely removed today, we remove the gradual historic value that we're building around here from a historical standpoint.
I would argue that what's historical about the building is in the building and in that museum and in that the LeConte Stewart Gallery. I think that's the primary source of the historical value
Right.
of that building. And preserving that is obviously important.
appreciate the argument.
Correct. And that even comes down back to, again, to the HVAC systems, in maintaining those antiquities, if you will. It's very important to maintain that climate as accurately as possible. So, again, back to the boiler, same comment, Mayor, is you get to a point where if you're reinvesting in this elderly technology, if you will, there's a point where it just doesn't become feasible anymore. And so even in the short term, when you talk about removing it and replacing the system with something that will suffice for the next 10 or even into 15 years, that's still a prudent decision to make as well, instead of continuing to feed that monster.
And my thoughts there were more, all the rage it seems to be like in government buildings is geothermal heating and being LEED certified, and, that works great, especially, a simple upgraded HVAC I'm all for, but I think there's a fine balance there between what's reasonable and what's long-term. But I think staff probably has enough direction or guidance from the council to maybe come back with something a little more,
Refined?
I was going to say watered down, but yeah, refined sounds a lot better. So. All right.
Just one more quick question, though. I'd imagine if you're talking option A, so you're talking instead of millions, tens of thousands or something, a lower figure. Is that something, I'm trying to think of the budget picture in my mind, but is that something, I would imagine that would be something that could be absorbed, other than you're taking one away from another priority, but
Right.
That's a fairly important priority. Is that something that could just be absorbed from general fund?
I think the answer is absolutely, but it's just exactly what you've said. We'll have priorities, and we'll look to you to set those priorities and say, we want 3 firefighters, and we want to do this building, and we want to throw a bunch of money into roads. Which ones don't you want to do?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you can't get to the library, what good is it? First building.
Scott, thanks for coming and giving us the update.
Thank you. Appreciate your
being
time.
with us again
Thank you.
tonight.
Appreciate it.